Number 20, North Carolina 2020 preview on Good Morning College Football. Hello and welcome to episode 70 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you so much for joining us today for a team preview where we are very much out on a limb compared to just about anybody else as far as computer-based analytic systems go, as far as media analysts go. The number 20 team in our CFB Winning Edge preseason team strength power rankings is the North Carolina Tar Heels. And as we'll dig into a little bit later, perhaps we're overrating the Tar Heels, many might say, but also perhaps we have a way of calculating our ratings that show maybe a little bit of value and place UNC potentially as an underrated team in the larger college football scope of things. But as always, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for subscribing to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, where you can access a wide range of content, new stuff almost every day. We've got live shows. We've got college fantasy football focused shows, Devi, the Campus to Canton version of fantasy football, where you have a college side and NFL side in the same league. Our live shows for drafts going on right now, best ball drafts on Underdog. I've been getting a lot of action this week, and we've got some very smart folks who are basically in those drafts all day, trying to find value, trying to pass on what they learn to our subscribers, our viewers. And on that note, you can join CampusToCanton.com for as little as $2.99 per month. That includes those best ball rankings that are being updated constantly as new information comes out, as these drafts work a little bit differently or have played out a little bit differently in a lot of cases compared to more traditional college fantasy football drafts. They are also Power 4 only, so that adds a little bit of a different layer, different elements of strategy to consider. So if you're looking for up-to-date information, rankings, how to navigate that new opportunity that's popped up just this week, we hope you'll check out CampusToCanton.com and join for as little as $2.99 per month. If you want access to even more, and our lower scholarship or walk on and scholarship and recruiting tiers have access to the site and a ton of rankings and tools, so much information for our subscribers, whether it's written content or more. But also at the C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier levels, you get access to our team profiles, which we'll discuss in this preview, show an example of North Carolina, our returning production database as well, and our 2024 stat projections, which also could come in handy if you're preparing for those Underdog best balls, if you're looking for an upcoming college fantasy football draft, DFS, all that good stuff. We use a 3-year window for each team, play caller, and head coach, and try to remove opinion from everything. And so I think it's a good tool to see how those system-based projections compare to our expert rankings, because most of basically everything that I do at CFB Winning Edge try to remove opinion from the calculus, want to just let the numbers speak for themselves, do the work, put all the information in, and then trust sort of the process, so to speak. But there are also some really, really smart people out there, including at Campus to Canton and the CFF team, who add context and really dig into what these numbers say to see where they agree, where they don't. And I think it's a good comparison tool. So if you want access to all of that information, we hope you'll give us a try at the C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier at campustocanton.com. All right. With that in mind, let's dig into our full 2024 North Carolina team preview. And usually to start things off, we of course will see what the odds makers have to say. And at DraftKings this morning, North Carolina regular season win total is 7.5. The odds to win the national championship are 300-1 for the Tar Heels, 35th, tied for 35th on the odds board. By far the lowest of any team that we have discussed so far in our team preview series, our first 19 previews. The Tar Heels have the same odds as UCF and Kentucky to win the national championship. Kind of interesting that those are actually teams we'll be previewing pretty soon, and our numbers are perhaps a little higher on those teams than the odds makers in the market. North Carolina is 40-1 to win to make the college football playoff. So actually rank even lower once you throw in a lot of the group of 5 conference teams who have a easier path to that 12th playoff spot, being an automatic qualifier if they are able to become the highest rated, highest ranked group of 5 conference champion. North Carolina is also 30-1 to win the ACC, has the 8th, odds ranked 8th among its conference rivals. So the odds makers, the market, not very high on North Carolina, and they're not alone. Basically every poll, every ranking that we reference sort of as a little bit of a composite, give an idea of how our ratings compare to other very smart people in the industry, whether they do a computer-based analytics projection system or are, a media member that covers this for a living, digs into a lot of the details and gives more of an opinion-based prediction. We are much, much higher than anyone else. On that, media side of things, Athlon Sports preseason magazine does not have North Carolina in its top 25 rankings. Neither does Phil Steele. Andy Staples of On3, his post-spring top 25 that was published several weeks ago, does not include North Carolina. Neither does ESPN's Mark Schlabach in his post-spring rankings. The Sporting News doesn't have Carolina ranked. Stuart Mandel of The Athletic didn't have the Heels in his top 25. They're not in the top 25 EA Sports Power Rankings. So all of those see North Carolina certainly as not a top 25 team. The computer-based systems that we lean on that give a little more, rank every team and you're able to see exactly where North Carolina fits in, much like we do at CFP Winning Edge. The highest next to us is Kelly Ford, and the K Ford ratings have North Carolina 41st nationally in his power rankings. ESPN's Football Power Index has the Heels 42nd. Beta Rank has North Carolina 49th, and then SP Plus, Bill Connolly and ESPN have North Carolina number 50 nationally. So again, we are way out on a limb in our ranking for the Tar Heels, and some of that probably has to do with the change at the quarterback position, losing Drake Maye, one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL draft in this most recent cycle. A player who was very productive for North Carolina throughout his entire career, but last season 3,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, averaged 8.5 yards per attempt. Also ran for 449 yards and 9 scores. Maye, just an incredibly productive quarterback. It's going to be difficult to replace North Carolina as a whole, and we'll dig into the numbers more specifically, but on the lower end as far as returning production goes this season. 98th overall, 113th on the offensive side of the ball. Because of that, and because defense, even though, a little more kind of slightly above the national average as far as returning production goes, but that was the side of the ball where the Heels struggled more so last season. So coming off an 8-5 season, 4-4 in ACC conference play, and let's dig into how everything shook out for North Carolina last season. Let me share my screen here. We're looking at our CFB Winning Edge team profiles. As you can see, North Carolina ranked 20th in those preseason team strength ratings. We'll get to all the stats here in a bit, but scrolling down into the center of the page where the schedule portion is, and that bottom section has a 2023 review. And North Carolina, as I said, 8-5, but actually didn't quite play like an 8-win team, more of a 7-win team. If you look at those second order wins based on the accumulation of post-game win expectancy numbers from collegefootballdata.com, where UNC got out to a great start, 100% post-game number against South Carolina in the opener, so got credit for a full win there. Very fortunate to get by App State in week 2, double overtime, just a 43% post-game win expectancy number, so only get 0.43 second order wins there. Go all the way down the board. Much better the next 2 games against Pitt and Syracuse. Another fortunate victory with an under 50% post-game win expectancy number. And if you haven't heard of these before, that's an advanced box score analysis that if this game were to be played 100 times, 1,000 times, however many, you would expect North Carolina to win that Miami game with that same box score 40% of the time. So just 4 out of every 10 matchups. But the Heels were able to get it done last year. Start out, 6-0 and rising high in the rankings. We're able to find ways to win 2 games where the stats wouldn't necessarily suggest they would more often than not. But then, as has had a tendency to happen under Mack Brown in recent years, the second half of the season doesn't work out quite as well. Carolina loses a couple of games that you would expect it to win more often than not. That Virginia loss was a surprise, losing to Georgia Tech, where sort of the reverse happened. UNC had a better than 50% chance of winning that game, according to the post-game numbers, but come up short in that shootout. Get back on the right side of things with a dominant performance against Campbell, the FCS level, a 2 overtime victory, yet another game that Carolina was able to win when the post-game numbers didn't expect the Heels to be able to do so. But then the last 3 games of the season, UNC really struggled, less than 5% post-game win expectancy in all 3. The offense struggled, didn't score more than 20 points in any of those final 3 games. And then, of course, Drake Maye moving on to the NFL. We don't put a lot of stock in bowl game performances, but if you were trying to get a read on, okay, how is this North Carolina team going to look in the post-Drake Maye era, didn't turn out all that well. So why in the world would our numbers look at a North Carolina team that perhaps wasn't as good as its record would indicate? Based on those post-game numbers, this was more of a 6 or 7 win team. Fortunate to win 3 games, including 2 of them in overtime, where it's absolutely a coin flip, could go either way. he loses one of the best quarterbacks in college football. What was he, third overall pick, Drake Maye? And, a defense that struggled at times, an offense that has to replace playmakers at the wide receiver position as well, an offensive line that's in flux. Why are we higher on North Carolina than most? Let's take a look at the returning production database to get a little bit closer lay of the land here. And one of the primary reasons, and this might sound a little strange because we haven't seen a ton out of Max Johnson in the last couple of years, but Johnson coming in as a veteran presence is part of that reason. And we'll show his, you might have seen a glimpse of it in the team profiles, but he's a little bit higher rated as far as an individual rating. Think the College Football 25 video game. We call our video game ratings. They are built in part to resemble those ratings from EA Sports. Started doing that in 2018. We've made some adjustments over the years, and so they've differed a bit. They don't stop at 99 like they would in the video game rating, go up into the 100s. But Johnson is a 90 plus rated player. So there's not, as big of a drop off from Drake Maye as you might expect. And we'll dig into why Johnson is as high as he is in those ratings. But he's an experienced quarterback, has had a lot of opportunity over the last 4 years, not always as a starter, but able to come in and perform when asked. Last season at Texas A&M, he threw for nearly 1,500 yards, 9 touchdowns, was intercepted 5 times. The yards per attempt, not quite as good as Maye, about a full yard less. So perfect numbers, no, but was able to replace some of the production lost with Drake Maye moving on, adding Jacoby Criswell back from his stint at Arkansas, adds a little depth there. Connell Harrell got an opportunity to perhaps take a early edge in that quarterback battle by getting that start in the bowl game. Didn't necessarily work out that way. It sounds like Johnson has an edge in that battle coming out of the spring, but there are options here, and none of them are likely to play quite as well as Drake Maye. But I think the quarterback situation may be a little bit better than some might expect on the outside looking in. Omarion Hampton, simply one of the best running backs in college football. Carried a heavy workload last year, 253 attempts for over 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns, averaged nearly 6 yards per carry. If that quarterback situation or the receivers, as we'll discuss shortly, needs a little time to get up to full speed, you can rely on Hampton. The offensive line, less experienced than last year, as we'll get into. So maybe, his numbers won't be quite as good. He won't be maybe quite as efficient, but the opportunity should be there. Hampton has proved he can carry a heavy workload, maybe asked to do that again and perhaps even a little bit more. But, running back and rushing production doesn't carry a ton of weight in these returning production calculations, doesn't carry a ton of weight in a lot of our team performance numbers and things like that. But Hampton is a solid foundation, somebody you can build around offensively on this North Carolina offense. Losing British Brooks as the top backup, going to need somebody to be able to spell Hampton every once in a while. So will it be Caleb Hood? Will it be Kellen Hood? Someone else? We're going to, if you're in North Carolina, you don't want to run Hampton into the ground, even though you might be tempted to, as clearly the best player on this offense, or someone, one of the best at his position in college football, that you might want to give him 300 carries. It's going to be, I think, pretty important to see who emerges to be able to lighten that load just a little bit when asked to do so. The receiver position, if as far as returning production goes, doesn't look like it's in terrible shape. Only losing your second leading receiver. It just so happens that second leading receiver was Tez Walker, who got a late start to his season, unfortunately, last year, but put up big numbers when given the opportunity. Nearly 700 yards. Ended up ranking number 2 in targets, just one behind Nate McCollum. 41 catches, 7 touchdowns, led the team. Walker going to be, I think, a pretty good pro. Excited for his future, but JJ Jones back as the leading receiver, not necessarily that ideal or prototype of a number one go-to target, but he was the player that was most available last season, ended up leading the team in receptions, in yards. Tight end Bryson Nesbitt, kind of a big athletic wide receiver. Didn't technically start for North Carolina last year, but ended up as an all-ACC performer at that position, and a little bit of a surprise to see Nesbitt come back. I know there are a lot of NFL folks excited about his ability to transition to the NFL. Somebody who was hurt at the end of last year and out this spring, and that is a scenario that is common in this wide receiver group. A lot of these players missed either the whole spring or parts of the spring, were injured towards the end of last year. So, going to have to see. All right, is Nate McCollum back and fully healthy? Kobe Paysur, who had a significant missed a significant chunk of last season due to injury. Tight end John Copenhaver, who actually did start over Nesbitt, but limited also by injury. Jake Johnson transferring in, brother of Max Johnson, adds even more depth to this tight end room, but who's going to emerge as sort of that number one wide receiver? Is there a real playmaker? Is there somebody who is going to get 70, 80, 90 targets this season? Kobe Paysur, we expected might have been that player last year. I believe in most CFF drafts, especially with Walker's eligibility uncertainty, Paysur sort of rose up the ranks quite a bit. If he's back and healthy, able to get to 100%, expect that he might be in the running there. But if not, it could be anyone in this group. It could even be one of a couple true freshmen who come in as highly rated recruits. But Hampton can be a receiver out of the backfield, 29 catches, 222 yards, 1 touchdown. That's a nice safety valve there. But still certainly some questions, even though the experience is, kind of on the relative high side, at least as far as this North Carolina offense goes on in that receiving core. The offensive line only brings back one full-time starter, one player with double-digit starts, and that's Willie Lampkin, who was a versatile player, center, both guard positions, somebody that a little on the short side. I think he's listed at 5'11", but a very experienced player that North Carolina is going to have to rebuild this unit around him. Losing 4 players who are counted as starters being on the field for that first snap in more than half of North Carolina's games last season due to graduation. Another Diego Pounds transferred out. Not a lot as far as that level of experience transferring in, even though Ja'Kiah Leftwich, Howard Sampson, Austin Blaskey all coming in and either expected to start or compete for starter type snaps, compete for one of those roles. The overall level of experience is quite low as far as North Carolina goes, statistically speaking, on the offensive line. The defense is in a little bit better shape, but loses top tackler Cedric Gray, moving out of eligibility, graduating, going on to the NFL. Losing Don Chapman, transferring out. Third leading tackler Giovanni Biggers is going to be gone as well. So a solid core of experienced players back on the the defensive side of the ball. But 3 of the top 6 tacklers are moving on. Losing Miles Murphy, Tamari Fox up front are fairly large losses as well. Both of those players, double-digit pressures last season, and not huge producers, but factors up front on the defensive line. So how will North Carolina replace those players? Overall, again, referencing the numbers, 98th in returning production. That's adjusted for incoming transfers nationally. 113th on the offensive side of the ball, 58th defensively. And if you compare those numbers to the raw returning production, so not adjusted for transfers coming in, only based on who's coming back, who's not from last season, North Carolina actually fell in every category in the national ranking. So the Tar Heels not super aggressive adding productive, experienced players through the transfer portal to replace some of that lost production. Would have been 76th in overall returning production. Just raw, not adjusted for transfers. 97th on offense, 40th on defense. So maybe there's and because we are much higher on North Carolina than everybody else, as we discussed, maybe I'm looking for a reason. Maybe I'm searching desperately for, this is why, this is what everybody's missing. So maybe this is a stretch, but perhaps North Carolina, because it wasn't as aggressive, didn't bring in large numbers of players to step in and be impact performers, maybe on the defensive side of the ball or the receiving core. Maybe it's because this roster was in decent shape, a little bit better shape than expected, and the coaching staff felt confident that the players who are returning are going to be able to develop into more to move from contributors to full-time starters and not see as much of a drop-off. Maybe there just wasn't as big of a need to bring in large numbers of players. We'll see. Maybe that's a little bit wishful thinking, but honestly, that is sort of how the numbers shake out, the way that we look at them. So on that note, let's go back to the team profiles, and you can see that North Carolina ranks 13th in our overall roster strength ratings. Roster strength is built using those individual player ratings. We do it for every player on the roster. Their raw recruiting ratings coming out of high school from 247 Sports and the composite there, Rivals and On3. We track those, adjust those numbers for experience and career production. Players can add points to their player rating based on meeting on-field statistical benchmarks, and that's where those production points come in. That's part of the reason why Max Johnson is a 91, almost 92 rated player. He's got some past production, and it's been a little while. But when Johnson was a starter at LSU early in his career, he put up some decent numbers. Threw for 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. At UCLA in 2021 in the first game of the season, put up video game type numbers in an easy win against Central Michigan that year, threw for nearly 10.5 yards per pass attempt and 4 touchdowns against Mississippi State that season, 300 yards plus 325 against Auburn in a loss for LSU. At the end of the season, Johnson did struggle after that Auburn game for the most part. But at the end of the season, back-to-back 300-yard performances without an interception against Louisiana Monroe and Texas A&M. Against, or should I say with the Aggies, Johnson got limited opportunities in 2022, did not play in the final 7 games of that season. In 2023, was not the starter at the beginning of the year. Limited opportunity early on in the middle of the season. The numbers weren't spectacular, but did in his final appearance have over 300 yards passing against Ole Miss. Completed 73.8% of his 42 pass attempts that day. Went down with injury and then eventually ended up moving on. But those 2021 games and a couple or at least one as a true freshman, he threw for 434 yards and 3 touchdowns against Ole Miss in 2020 as a true freshman. Those performances, add some production value for Johnson. You could argue, all right, we haven't seen it in 2 years, maybe dial it back a little bit. And that's fair, but that's not our process. That's not the way we've done things. And so Johnson is still, relatively highly rated as a quarterback. The position group, our position strength ratings for the North Carolina quarterbacks are 25th. Those are adjusted again for experience and production. But in raw terms, just average, 247 composite rating at the position, North Carolina ranks 26th. They rank 20th in Rivals, 21st at On3. So this is a talented quarterback room, even though maybe the high-end potential is not quite there compared to Drake Maye. But I don't think it's going to be, a huge problem. I don't think North Carolina is going to get terrible quarterback play. I think Max Johnson could actually surprise a little bit if given an opportunity to start. I think we could potentially see some numbers similar to what he put up in 2021, maybe a little bit better. After 2 years. With some more experience, all those practices, some game reps as well. Senior quarterbacks who've started 23 games and played 30 in their career, hopefully, won't make a ton of mistakes and potentially could develop into quality starters. Also the son of an NFL quarterback, longtime NFL quarterback. So knows the game. And I think perhaps I'm too optimistic and again, searching for reasons to say, oh, this is why our numbers are good and everybody else is underrating North Carolina. But I think Max Johnson is going to be, an asset at the quarterback position. Not expecting all ACC, Heisman contender, top 5 NFL draft pick, but I'm expecting that quarterback position to not be a major problem for North Carolina this year. Hampton is great, upper 90s as far as his rating goes. I think he's certainly deserved that and capable of performing quite well again. The wide receiver room, has talent, guys who are 88 or so rated players, 90 JJ Jones in his On3 rating coming out of high school. Haven't put up huge numbers, but have been fairly steady. Nate McCollum, when healthy, has put up the best numbers over the course of his career, but Kobe Paysour has some real potential as well. There's depth and talent. Gavin Blackwell, hopefully will be able to up his production if given the opportunity. Was on the field for a little less than 30% of snaps last season. But other guys that we just haven't quite seen, become contributors, still I think have the potential to do so. Christian Hamilton, Chris Culliver, and then the true freshman coming in. A lot of good reports about Jordan Shipp coming out of spring practice. He's a mid-90s rated player as a high school recruit. Got a lot of opportunity with some injury limitations this spring for the rest of the group. But then the tight end is really a deep position. We do have Nesbitt slotted in as the starting tight end. I know technically last year he wasn't. Copenhaver was. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see North Carolina play 2 tight ends very regularly. Maybe Johnson is going to step up and be one of those two with Nesbitt and Copenhagen. Wouldn't also be surprised if Nesbitt plays more of a traditional wide receiver role, big slot as a 6'5", 235 type player, or be a matchup, red zone threat, put him outside, try to make a one-on-one situation. I think that his skill set, even though the numbers have been good, I think there's definitely room for improvement for Nesbitt. He could emerge as maybe, one of the top targets in this offense if need be, if somebody else doesn't emerge as that, go-to receiver, or if the injuries, continue to impact availability in the receiving core, wide receivers specifically. The offensive line, we mentioned it in the early days of Good Morning College Football, in the early days of spring practice, that some of the sites that cover, some of the beat reporters that cover this program very closely, even though the experience isn't great, only one full-time starter back, relying on potentially, we have projected 3 first-year transfers coming in as starters. There is some optimism that this group is going to be just as good and perhaps have an opportunity to be even better than last year. And UNC was a solid offensive line, ranked 35th in our O-line performance ratings last season. So when you see 4 out of 5 starters, or technically 5, because 6 players had starting designations as having more than 7 starts, usually expect a bit of a regression from a top 35 offensive line. But if these young talented players who just haven't had that opportunity perhaps to become starters elsewhere are able to do so at North Carolina, get coached up and in a system that worked pretty well up front last season, maybe it will be a little bit of an overachieving unit compared to most expectations. Again, maybe that's me just looking for reasons to be optimistic, but and some team sites and even beat reporters sometimes see a little bit more of the positive than the negative. Nevertheless, there, it wasn't considered a doomsday scenario. It wasn't considered, the offensive line is really, really in trouble based on, who's not here in 2024 compared to 2023. So again, maybe cautious optimism, but the offensive line, hopefully for our sake, so that we don't look incredibly silly having North Carolina as a top 20 team, maybe is not going to be a major issue either. So offensively, that's a big reason, because as you see, ranked in offensive roster strength, North Carolina is a top 10 offense in college football, according to our numbers. The raw stats seem to back that up a little. Not stats, raw ratings coming out of high school. Average offensive player rating as a high school recruit in the 247 composite, 18th for North Carolina. Top 20 at running back, top 20 wide receiver, top 10 at tight end, 32nd on the offensive line. This is a talented offense. The defensive numbers are just as good. 20th in average 247 rating on the defensive side of the ball, 12th on the defensive line, 23rd at linebacker, 31st at defensive back. But this is a more experienced side of the football. I mean, you see the bold returning starters. K'Mon Rucker did miss spring practice. He would be, he is the top performer, producer, best player on this UNC defense. 18 production points last year. His player rating is 113. Sounds ridiculous to say that we base these on the video game, but have a player ranked 113th. I understand that's a change we've made over time, and it's worked out well for us to sort of differentiate the best from the best. But Rucker can absolutely be a major impact player. And hopefully he'll be back and fully healthy after sitting out the spring with a hand injury. But he pairs, with an experienced group on that defensive line: Desmond Evans, Kevin Hester Jr. Hester perhaps underrated. He's somebody who just has not been productive. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on defensive line play, but I would have to expect somebody who's appeared in 50 games, started 21 of them, has only had, one production point added over the course of that time, probably making a little bit bigger impact than our way of calculating it, adding up some of those stats that, of course, defensive linemen struggle to put up compared to other positions. Perhaps Hester's a little bit of an underrated player. We do look at PFF grades and things like that, and do add production based on those. So he's not grading, super, super high either, but still experience, 3 out of 4 up front is something to build on for a defense that took a step in the right direction, was in the triple digits in team performance ratings in both 2021 and 2022, improved to 71st, nevertheless made a change. Geoff Collins, who didn't have the best performance as a head coach at Georgia Tech, wasn't coaching last season, but made his name as a defensive coordinator at places like Mississippi State and Florida. Think that he'll have an opportunity to take a fairly experienced group and improve its performance on the field even a little bit more. Maybe leaning more into the running game might, save the defense a little bit, help it stay a little bit more rested. That wasn't kind of the way things worked last season, where North Carolina ranked 6th in offensive pace as far as time between snaps, time between plays, number 5 in offensive pace as far as plays per game go on the offensive side of the ball. So that might have factored a little bit into some of the defensive numbers not being great. We use more efficiency stats than raw stats, but still, maybe if we do see a little bit of slowing down on the offensive side of the ball, or lean on the running game even more than it did last season, perhaps that'll have a positive impact on the defense as well. But multiple starters back in the secondary, getting DeAndre Boykins back from injury. He missed all of last season, but it's been a double-digit starter. Adding Jakeen Harris, who's been 20-game starter in his past, but didn't play very much last season due to injury. So there's I think, as far as a top group, as far as the starting lineup goes, North Carolina looks pretty good. Maybe the depth isn't quite there. Not very many players who played 20% of snaps coming back from last season. Javari Ritzy being the most experienced in this 2-deep. Will Hardy played about a quarter of the snaps, a little bit more in the secondary last season. But everybody else is going to be taking on a larger role. And it goes back to what we discussed about with the returning production. Players who, they're not just filling departed player spots with experienced transfers. So hopefully, for our sake, for our numbers' sake, this North Carolina coaching staff knows what it's got as far as bringing those players through and what's the word I'm looking for? It just left. Developing those players into contributors and then eventually starters. We'll see how that works out, especially in the back 7 defensively. But again, it's a talented roster. It's talented on the defensive side of the ball as far as raw talent goes. The position strength numbers aren't quite as good. The linebackers, middle of the pack nationally as far as position strength goes. That's a bit of a step down compared to just raw talent. But the secondary looks a little bit better, a little bit more experienced than some, and hopefully that will play out well. But the big deal for me, and as far as our projections go, is the schedule looks quite manageable. Our strength of schedule rankings have North Carolina at number 64, so roughly FBS average on the low end of a Power 4 conference team, the way that we calculate it. So that trip to Minnesota in week 1 is going to be a real, barometer test. Minnesota, I think, is a little underrated nationally. Looking at their preseason win total, we're higher on Minnesota. That's going to be a tough matchup, but a very winnable game for North Carolina. We have the Tar Heels favored by about a touchdown in that one. If UNC takes care of business and gets a win there, the 3 other non-conference games, I expect the Tar Heels to win. Charlotte should be a win. North Carolina Central should be a win. James Madison, certainly the last couple of years have been excellent, but so much turnover, coaching transition, the returning production numbers are really, really on the low end for James Madison. So that game, North Carolina should be able to win. Are they going to be able to win by 2 touchdowns like we have projected? Maybe not. Might be a little closer than that. But that is a scenario where North Carolina has a significant talent edge, and we'll discuss our talent edge numbers here in just a second for UNC. But 4-0 in the non-conference, opening up with Duke, Pitt, and Georgia Tech, all winnable games in conference play. This UNC team, if we add up just our projected win total, projected win percentages based on these projected point spreads, we're not looking at a 6-7-0 start probably, but we would expect on average for North Carolina to win 5.5 or 6 of those first 7 games. They're able to do that. They're in a great position to get over the 7.5. Just have to avoid losing those games like they did last year, back-to-back against Virginia and Georgia Tech, where you would expect North Carolina to be a decent favorite in those and be able to perhaps exert some of its talent advantage. We'll see. we have UNC expected to get a little revenge on Virginia. That is a road trip to Charlottesville, but the Tar Heels is a double-digit favorite there. Back-to-back road games and traveling to Florida State. That's the most difficult matchup for North Carolina, and we don't obviously see the Tar Heels favored there, but as you probably already noticed, that's the only regular season game in which we don't have North Carolina favored. Have them favored in the final 3 against Wake Forest, Boston College, and then some might argue probably shouldn't be favored against NC State. Very buzzy preseason team, getting a lot of love in as a dark horse ACC title contender. Maybe in some cases not even dark horse. People expecting the Wolfpack to compete with the Florida States and the Clemsons of the world. But North Carolina, toughest matchups as far as our numbers go are that NC State game at home and at Florida State. Don't play Clemson. Don't play Miami. Notre Dame's not on the schedule this year. Not an ACC game, of course, but another difficult matchup. So this schedule sets up quite well. And part of the reason why our numbers like North Carolina as much as they do, these are our 2 other projection systems, our Talent Edge projections and our what we call Prism projected scoring margin. The Talent Edge projection looks only at our roster strength numbers. We do make adjustments on both of these for home field advantage, but the idea is, okay, we factor in everything in our team strength ratings. We factor in head coach history and performance. Our team performance ratings specific to head coaches is a little bit of a factor. A team performance from last season is a factor. We'd use a 3-year window even in the preseason as far as team performance numbers go. But as we know in college football, more and more, past performance isn't always indicative of what we can expect for this upcoming season because of so much turnover in the transfer portal and coaching staffs and things like that. So I want to look at, all right, what does just the roster tell me? How does this roster stack up against the other? Just on paper, that's where these Talent Edge numbers come from. And North Carolina, and you could perhaps disagree. You say we have Max Johnson overrated. We have these defensive players overrated. The wide receivers may be overrated. I understand, but I trust the process. And our numbers indicate that North Carolina will have a talent edge in every single matchup this season. That includes the trip to Florida State. That's certainly debatable. Believe me, I understand. I do not think our numbers are perfect, but they sometimes help identify perhaps a team that's a little bit underrated, and North Carolina seems to fit that mold this year. Prism, on the other hand, is stats only. So I don't, I want to take a look at who plays better, who performs the best on the field. A stats only look at it. Don't put talent into it at all. So this is the complete opposite of the talent edge projections. That's where North Carolina is at its weakest, and that's probably where a lot of people are basing their. I mentioned all the media members who have North Carolina unranked. And it's not like the other computers are super high on the Tar Heels either, being in the 40s and 50s. But this is people trust their eyes, right? And North Carolina hasn't played up to the level of its talent so far, and that goes into these numbers the most. That's where Minnesota would be a favorite if we're only looking at performance on the field based on head coach, coordinators, and the team itself over the last 3 years, or stat projections. That's where these numbers come from. Minnesota would be favored in that scenario. James Madison would be favored in that scenario. Duke, a touchdown favorite. Florida State, 3 touchdowns. Even Boston College is favored if we're looking stats only. So that's our biggest area. That's our biggest area of concern, is that North Carolina, the way we calculate it, grades out very, very well in a lot of the talent numbers, but hasn't been able to translate that talent to the field entirely. And so, perhaps we're being a little too optimistic. You could say, again, perhaps our talent numbers even are a little too high on North Carolina. But because of what we calculate to be a top 10 roster on the offensive side of the ball, a top 15 roster nationally, a top 30 defensive unit on paper, they're going to need to play much better than that. 71st last season in defensive team performance. But if North Carolina is able to harness that talent, if the coaching staff under Mack Brown, who might be on the way out, honestly, might be ready to retire again. There was some speculation at the end of last season. Would it be the end for Mack Brown? Has been probably for a while. But that can do some funky things to how a team performs on the field. Will they not play up to the level of their ability again if their coach is maybe on the way out or aging, not as involved in the day-to-day? Or is it, hey, maybe we do hear, all right, this is going to be Mack Brown's final season, and let's rally around the coach and win it for Mack? I don't know. Our numbers don't factor in those types of things, but perhaps there's a coaching scenario that could be a positive or a negative for this North Carolina team. I do think there's an opportunity for Geoff Collins to come in and sort of revitalize his career, or improve this defense a bit. But that's also a question mark. That's also perhaps wishful thinking. So we will see how it all shakes out. But it is clear that CFP Winning Edge and our team strength power rankings are much, much higher on North Carolina than basically anyone else in the industry. So I don't think our numbers are perfect. I understand we might end up looking very silly with this North Carolina projection, but also we might end up looking smart, and maybe some of the others out there weren't quite able to capture how potentially solid this roster is, and that carries a lot of weight in our rankings. So that will do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us for our North Carolina preview. We will be back on Monday to talk about the number 21 team in our preseason power rankings. It's yet another SEC program, but we're high on the Kentucky Wildcats compared to a lot of other folks out there. So that'll be another maybe interesting preview, very nerdy as it always is, digging into these numbers, but we appreciate you tuning in and joining us and sticking with us. Thank you to those of you who are subscribed to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Please do like this video. It helps us a ton. Please follow Campus to Canton on all of our social media channels. Be on the lookout for podcasts. Come out just about every single day on the feed. The CFP Winning Edge podcast. We just wrapped our Big 12 Part 1 conference preview that posted this Friday morning. We've already previewed the entire ACC and Notre Dame, so you can get even more thoughts on North Carolina and then other ACC rivals and the newcomers in that league on the CFP Winning Edge podcast. And if you'd like access to all 134 teams of these team profiles with those 3 different projection models, with all the player information, want access to those returning production database for all 134 FBS team pages, and then also the stat projections. Didn't show them on the screen here today, but a lot of information there as well. Coaching history, tons of stats, useful for those best balls, for CFF, all that good stuff. Give you a little extra, another lens to view these teams that maybe is a little bit different than many of the others out there. Compare it, use it as another data point compared to those CFF player rankings at campus2canton.com and those best ball rankings, which again, can access those for as little as $2.99 per month. But join us on the C2C Winning Edge tier or all 22 tier for access to all of these sheets and databases. So again, that's going to do it for us. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend and take care.